AEC Business, the construction industry's innovation and technology show.
I'm Aarni Heiskanen and my guest is Paul Indinger, the Managing Director of Building Radar, a Germany-based company. We discuss how AI can help construction sector suppliers discover projects and leads and make informed decisions. Paul, thanks for joining us.
Thank you very much for having me, Aarni.
I think you're a pretty young company, but tell us a bit about your background and what inspired you to start Building Radar.
So Building Radar actually was founded pretty much right out of coincidence, out of university. So I'm an economist by training, and I happened to spend a year in China after high school. And in my first year of studies, I, by complete coincidence, met the global head of sales for architects and designers of a large carpet company. And that guy asked me, he said, Paul, you're a student, I'm sure you need money. Can you help me research construction projects that these 10 architects are currently working on? And then I went ahead and did that, and he was absolutely right. I did need the money. And I ended up doing spreadsheets for him, basically with construction projects of the architects that they were trying to target. And then after a couple of months, after my first semester of economics, I called up some students in China and gave them the same pitch and said, hey, I will pay you €3.50 if you research construction projects for me. And this was basically how I always financed my studies. And then my co-founder and me, we did our masters together in London. And at some point, after a couple of beers, I told him about this carpet company that was paying me pretty good money actually for these construction projects. And then we basically had two ideas. So the first one was, are there more carpet companies out there? And then while doing that research, we realized that there's obviously many, many more building products that go into a building. And secondly, we also got the idea, like, why don't we try to use algorithms instead of students who visit the websites of the large architecture firms once per week and see if there's something new in their tab of projects. So unfortunately, it was not a great vision or something like that. It was really more like out of curiosity and out of just, I think, like entrepreneurial curiosity, I guess. And then we told our parents we're not going to get the fancy job in the London city, but we're going to do startup life. And that's basically how we started the company. And ever since we are working with mainly building product manufacturers. So anything from elevator companies, concrete, windows, facades, etc., to general contractors, but also planning firms, etc. Everybody who has something in common, which is they can make money when somebody's building a building.
Okay. That's a really exciting story. So you replaced human work with algorithms. Yeah, that's something.
Correct. Absolutely. And over time, it was only when we realized that construction sales is something extremely complicated because you have long sales cycles and you have something I've not seen in any other industry so far, that basically your buying center is made out of different companies. So B2B sales or enterprise sales is already difficult because you have your economic buyer and your champion and you have your purchasing. So you really have this complex buying center. But in construction, it is not even in one company, but it is like across several companies. So if you're trying to sell elevators into a building, it might be that the investor wants to be part of the decision, but it can also be that they say, I couldn't care less, like, let the GC decide this. Or it can be that the investor likes the product because it's very sustainable, it fits their agenda, they give it to the architect, but then the architect substitutes it for a different solution. So it's extremely complex to navigate this. And over time, we realized that the only way most of our customers really codify this is by hiring people who've done it for 20 years. So there's very few companies who really have a system where they could codify how they win construction projects. And also the CRM systems that is usually cannot really cover this. We can go into this deeper a little bit later. But we realized actually only over time that most of the companies don't really have a lead problem. So most of the time they have more than enough leads, but they really don't know how to navigate them and when to reach out and who to talk to and which value proposition is important for which stakeholder. And this is where also for us, the big beauty was that now with generative AI coming around, it's actually much easier to find these patterns and you don't need to do linear rules and stuff like that. So it's a really, really exciting time right now for us.
So what is your service as it is today? What does it contain?
So we distinguish basically 3 evolutions of Building Radar. So Building Radar 1.0 was just the data. So we research construction projects. And in every country around the world, there are 2 or 3 companies who've been doing this for decades manually. And they have these databases. Very often they belong to like publishing houses. And it's really like human research mainly for construction projects. And basically what we started out with, without knowing it, is actually building a digital version of these services. And then we realized, this is Building Radar 2.0, that there are 2 things missing most of the time. First of all, most of the construction companies, if you look at their sales pipelines, in their CRM, they only cover the bottom 30-40%, because most of their business comes from existing relationships, comes from pricing requests via contractors, etc. So very often everything that's happening before that is really happening in spreadsheets, in people's heads, in Outlook, but not in the system where this data should be, even if they use like sophisticated systems like Salesforce, etc. So what we did is, and our leads, one of our value propositions was that we find the leads very early, because we might find the data in a local newspaper where it says, yesterday the city council signed off on the new Amazon data center or something like that. And we realized that there was basically a gap between this early stage information and the system where our customers really can handle this. So we built a software around these leads that can basically cover the gap between the early stage leads and the CRM system, and is then connected with the CRM system. And third, so next to the data and the process part, we also started to build more and more of these enablement functionalities that now with AI, you can draft an email that's very specific to every single customer, or you can score the leads based on how close they are to your next plant, or if you already know the stakeholders that are involved, etc. So this is what we call Building Radar 2.0, which is the leads plus the process plus the enablement on top of it. And since like a little bit over 1.5 years, we actually realized that there is a lot of additional data that our customers have that is also handled in a very unprofessional way. So customers started to say, hey, we have this Excel spreadsheet with 500 requests that we got that our sales team never acted on, because they land in the info at email together with all the spam and all the other stuff. And we said, hey, actually, why don't we open up our platform on the top? And you can actually drop any kind of information in there. It doesn't matter if it's a lead that we detected on the internet, or if it's an inbound lead, or a lead from one of these traditional databases that very often do actually a really good job in finding very good data, but the companies usually or often don't have the right tools to process them. And by now we are really like a layer that sits on top of the CRM. You can think of it a little bit like a middleware where all of this data can come together. And then it can also, we're building agent workflows on top. So we start to understand their product portfolio. So it's by now very easy to train an LLM with all the product PDFs, etc., of a customer. And now you can give this to the agent, and it can start to actually create drafts for all of these inbound requests, or review the specification documents and say, hey, this has a score of XYZ. So once you know, like we know all the projects that are out there traditionally from Building Radar 1.0, and we now know the products that our customers are selling, and we are connected to their CRM system, or for around 30% of our customers, we already are the CRM system because they use us for the whole pipeline. And this is now getting very interesting, because now you can really build agents that support the salespeople in pretty much everything except what we believe will be there forever, which is like really sitting down with the customer, building the trust, building these relationships. I think especially in construction, this will always be around, but we want to, and everybody is complaining that they don't have enough people and skilled labor shortage, yada, yada, yada. So we just want to take away the admin work, the logging your meetings, the writing the follow-up emails, etc., to give the salespeople more time for the actual exciting stuff.
Okay, so the general idea or understanding is that this industry is really traditional, And as you said, it's very much based on personal relationships. How did you find your customers, and who are they, and how did you get them to use your solution?
So we do like a lot of outbound sales ourselves. So this is also our traditional business model, that we tell our customers, like, yes, you have your existing customers, but your largest customer once was a new customer as well, right? So there's always a first time, and it's not always the best projects that are just done by your best customers. So it does make sense anyway to pick the best projects and not just the ones that your GCs are doing that have always been working with it. So there is a lot of value in picking the best projects, and they're usually equally distributed across the companies who always come to you, or the companies who go maybe normally to a competitor. So we do believe there's a lot of value in proactive sales. Doesn't matter where your current revenue is coming from. And this is also how we do our sales. So we have a large team of around 10 junior salespeople who go to trade shows, who cold call, like really honest traditional sales. And then, we also have account executives who then do like proof of concept phases with the customers and show them the value, and then hopefully convert them into paying customers. And like around 70% of our customers are building product manufacturers. So we have like really world market leaders like Schindler Elevators, for example, or Heidelberg Materials in the concrete space, or also like companies like Bosch who work with us in the security systems area. But then also like around 30% are more in the general contractor and services area.
Yeah, and you have been able to demonstrate value, I suppose, because you have so fantastic customers already.
I mean, what makes it easy for us is we impact the most important KPI, which is revenue and margins. So we don't talk to them about, and like, I don't want to disrespect any fleet management companies or something like that, but it's not like something where they say, okay, go talk to that department, but it's like, hey, we can help you increase your margin, or we can help you win more projects. And this is something that like usually the top management cares about. And therefore, the pitch is very, very easy. What's not always straightforward is to also then get the users on board, because again, if they've been used to mainly working with stuff that comes towards them, is often a kind of a change to really then also turn them into, this hunters and farmers analogy, right? And there are definitely more farmers than hunters in construction sales. And this is also one of our like missions to change this, because again, we believe the best projects are not necessarily done by the people you just happen to know if you're not a monopolist.
Yeah, but recently I think that for the last maybe 5 years, we have seen a tremendous growth in digitalization in the construction industry in general. How do you see you fit in the bigger picture of construction information management?
So we have the conviction that sales in construction projects works differently than in any other segment. And if you look at, and this might be a little bit too specific by now, but like if you look at like a sales system like Salesforce or Microsoft Dynamics or something like that, they usually have one axis. If you look at these opportunities, it's like something like qualification, then it's like something like you talk to the customer, you give them technical details, etc. Then you have some kind of quoting, and then you have like closed won or closed lost. Like this is usually how CRM systems are set up in every industry. And the problem with construction projects is you have a second axis, which is the timeline of the construction project. So you can have as many meetings with your customer as you want to. If the project doesn't progress, you will not sell your elevators into this project, right? If there's no groundbreaking, there will be nobody selling elevators to this project. So actually sales in construction is two-dimensional. You have your sales phases, which is like, again, the progress of how close you are to getting your contract signed. Plus you have the timeline of the construction project. And it's useless to be there super early, because maybe the guy who decides on your product is not even decided yet. So you basically, every sales process is like a vector across the timeline and the sales probability. And plus you have these multiple agents. You have the investor, the architect, the GC, the subcontractor, etc. And if you only have a one-dimensional sales system, this will usually not be able to cover the complexity of this process. And this is why we see that most of the time our customers, they set up the systems either by the timeline of the project, which is wrong because like your deal is not getting more likely just because the project is progressing, because the project will also finish just without you. And if you set it up with the construction, like with a sales cycle, that's also not doing it any justice because you always need to know where the project is at. And then to make it even more complex, a public hospital worked completely different than the Google data center in terms of the decision-making process. And a public hospital in Germany also works differently than in the UK. So there's like an infinite amount of ways how you would win a project. And what we are convinced of is if you manage to get the right context into the system, like really knowing when you have which touch point, which customer for which project, then you can actually train an LLM, and that LLM will actually at some point be able to really support the salespeople. And maybe you can turn the 25-year-old sales guy into as a successful person as the 55-year-old guy who has like 30 years more of experience, because you can actually support him with the agent who knows basically how a company navigates this very complex. And this is what we believe is very particular to the construction industry. So the big CRM companies, they will not get this, and it's also very industry specific. And then this is why, and we already have many of these customers on our platform. We already are connected to the CRM system. We already have the users on our platform. We have years of data from these customers. And this is why at the moment we are training these agents that really are supposed to support the sales workflows and really like give the time back to the users.
So you mentioned AI and agents. So if I know that some of our listeners are interested in technology and the technical solutions. Can you tell a little bit about how you use AI?
You mean for us internally or in the product?
Well, maybe both ways nowadays. It's interesting to hear. Maybe you use it for coding, I guess.
Sure, yeah. So like I'm unfortunately still like these 10-15% too stupid to now also be coding and stuff like that. But I can really like we've completely changed the way we build our product. So the old model was pretty much like the product manager goes to talk to the customer, gets the requirements, writes a nice PRD, and then gives the PRD to the engineer who already like somehow disagrees with what's supposed to be built there, then only builds 70%, gives it back to the product manager is annoyed, and then it's like and then your deadline goes like the 6 month project turns into a 9 month project. It's just very, very painful for everybody. And it's just, I think it's very similar actually to the relationship of architects and engineers and general contractors. And like now you can imagine a world where actually the architect can at least build the prototype of the building in real life. And to some degree, they can already build the whole building, depending on the complexity, and in like hours and not days. And this is just completely changing the way what's possible and also how you should be testing products, etc. So this is like a very, very big change that we see like for us internally. And then in our product, I would say it's also 3 basically like generations of AI. So we have been using AI before it was cool. So we built our first classifiers, I think like 6 or 7 years ago, where we still did our own training data. So the first classifiers that we built were ones that could decide if a newspaper article is about a construction project or not. And the way we did this is really like the whole team was sitting in a circle for lunch, and we had built an app where you could like, just like for Tinder, you could swipe left or right. You could say, is a construction project or it's not a construction project. And after we had done this for like 100,000 times, which took us several weeks, then actually this classifier was better or like on par with a human to decide that. And this is like, was the first time we basically used AI. And the second time was then really when like 3 or 4 years ago when LLMs were coming up and we started to build these like functionalities in the platform to draft an email for the user, to ask questions to the projects, etc., like these ChatGPT-like functionalities. And now since like last year, it's really like all about building up a memory. So the platform is not just a stupid like SaaS surface, but it actually has a soul, and the platform really understands what's going on. It understands who is the customer that's using me, what's the memory, and this is like really the most sophisticated way, that it's really an agent that is like really intelligible and can really have, and we all know how smart all of these systems are directly from the shelf, like these Claudes and the ChatGPTs, etc. And it's really all about giving them the right context and also giving the user the right interface to use this. And this is what we're doing right now.
I talked to many startups in the AEC technology space, and they are always eager to know how successful companies like you have actually made it. What are the lessons that you have learned, and maybe you can share?
Oh, we would need 2 weeks for the call if I. So the biggest mistake that we definitely did in the beginning, and we didn't have any clue, like as I said, we started this right out of university, and we thought like starting a startup is building nice pitch presentations and winning as many startup competitions as you can, and implementing as many buzzwords and fancy technologies. Like at some point we implemented satellite data from the European Space Agency because we thought we can track the construction projects, and then ended up winning the biggest satellite competition in Europe. And like this was all like nice, but we did not really obsess about, not enough, but not at all. It sounds really bad to say this, but I'm just going to be very honest, like was really the users, like do the end users, do you make their day easier by building that feature or not? And this is something that took us a long time, to be honest. And the bad thing was, like, it was always easy to sell Building Radar because everybody loves the idea of doing more sales and knowing more projects. And what we always really neglected was the user, and like how does it, and then often, you have like a person who's already very busy, and then their boss comes and say, hey, ta-da, we now have Building Radar. Now I expect you to do 50 cold calls every day on top of what you've been doing so far. And they will just not be very excited about this. So it's really like absolute obsession about the user. It's definitely something that could have saved us 2 or 3 years, and me probably like a centimeter of my hairline. So this is definitely the number one lesson, is like, don't scale before you have like really the stickiness that makes the user really come back, without like threatening that in the next business review they will look bad because they didn't do the required activities or something like that, but really obsess about the stickiness of the product. That would be my number one lesson.
Okay. Great advice. What's in the future for your company?
Yeah, for us, so we really do see this very big shift going on if you look at all the systems where all of the sales information is stored. And so traditionally there's this big debate of system of record versus system of action, where in the old world, in the Microsoft Dynamics and the Salesforces, etc., you need to have this nice data sheet, and with all of these drop-down fields, and the more of these drop-down fields are filled out, the better. And most of the time the user don't care about the drop-down fields and don't fill them out. And in the world of generative AI, you actually don't need that anymore, because you can get the context from the emails, the meeting notes, the call recordings, etc. So we believe this is really like a really generational opportunity to build this sales system for the construction industry that can handle this complexity of, again, like this very complicated sales process of like complicated buying center, long timelines, etc., and relationships who are super important. And if you can anticipate where your existing customers get their projects, like there's so much support you can give to the users if you build a nice system around it. And our strong conviction is the current systems that our users are using, they are not doing the job, because it's either like pen and paper, Excel, and people's heads, like the shadow CRM, or it's like the big systems who are not made for this two-dimensional sales process.
Okay. If you think beyond helping clients win more business, what kind of broader impact do you hope your company can have on the construction industry?
So I think the way products and services are allocated to projects is very flawed today. So our CPO is a former structural engineer, and he says there are literally skyscrapers out there that are made out of steel and not out of concrete, because his former skyscraper was also designed with steel. So there's a lot of people just going back to what they always did and just working with the companies that they've always worked with. And this is obviously not leading to the best buildings. So there are new solutions that are more sustainable. There are new methods. And we believe like you should allow that every building gets the best products and ways to build it possible for every single. And we believe if we can make the allocation more efficient, then this also has a very big impact beyond just the companies making more money. So one example is, for example, as I mentioned earlier, Heidelberg Materials. They're the first company who really now have net zero cement and concrete because they're capturing the carbon at the plant. And the problem is this kind of product sells extremely differently than your commodity concrete, because this the normal concrete is the absolute commodity. Nobody cares at all about what kind of concrete it is. You're gonna just take the cheapest one. And if now somebody comes along and says, here is CO2 neutral cement, but it's twice as expensive, then you completely need to change the way how this is sold and how the decision maker is somebody completely new. It's not a contractor anymore who pours the concrete who will be deciding this. It's somebody 2 years earlier in the process, like the Google that's building their data center and wants to have a nice CO2 balance there. And this is where our platform supports, and where we support these companies to really very often it's their most innovative solutions that the market doesn't know yet, where they use our platform to really make sure they bring these into the market. And this is why we believe if we can make this allocation more efficient, this will lead to better outcomes.
Well, what you described during this chat is, I think, game-changing in many ways. But where can our listeners find information on Building Radar?
So best place, I guess, our website, buildingradar.com. And then I'm always what I'm most motivated by is doing things we have not done before. So my ask also to the listeners would always be if you have any ideas, if this brought up some new way of thinking around something, please do reach out. And I'm always very excited to talk about new ideas because the most exciting things usually are not thought of by us, but actually by people who actually have the problem. We can always just pretend to have the problem. So I always love to motivate people to reach out to me personally also, and directly via LinkedIn or via email. And happy to always have a conversation about that.
Thanks for listening. Subscribe to this podcast and visit aec-business.com, the award-winning blog, for more news and stories.